All right, let's jump right into this explainer. You've probably heard the narrative of the birth of Moses 1,000 times before. The baby, the basket, the river. It's totally iconic. But today, we're going to peel back the layers of this familiar text and look at it through the lens of ancient history, some deep linguistic nuances, and honestly, some incredibly rich theological ironies.
Think you know the whole story of Moses? Well, prepare to have your assumptions challenged just a bit. What if that baby in the basket is really just the surface of a much, much deeper historical mystery? Because as we unpack the text of Exodus chapter 2, we're going to discover some profound moral ambiguities, incredible acts of defiance, and a literal masterclass in literary design that completely transforms how we understand Israel's greatest prophet.
Section 1. The Women Who Saved Moses. Right off the bat, we hit a truly remarkable detail. The earliest chapters of Moses' life are completely, and I mean completely, dominated by courageous, faithful women. He essentially enters a world run by female heroism. Scholars actually point out that these women act as a sort of collective Eve. Think about it. First, the midwives blatantly defy Pharaoh's direct orders just to save the Hebrew boys. Then, Moses' mother Jochebed doesn't just hide him for 3 months. She resourcefully crafts this waterproofed ark of bulrushes. Then you have Pharaoh's daughter, the literal princess of Egypt, defying her own father to rescue him. His sister Miriam bravely steps up to broker a deal for his care. And later on, his wife Zipporah and her sisters enter the narrative. These women acted as an unstoppable collective force, midwifing not just a baby, but the future deliverer of a brand new nation. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the story's grim irony. The oppressor's own daughter becomes the savior of Israel's savior. Pharaoh decrees that all Hebrew baby boys must be thrown into the Nile, but he never actually decreed that someone couldn't take them out. So his daughter pulls Moses right from the water, openly defying her father. The text notes his sister Miriam stood afar off to see what would happen. And because of Miriam's quick thinking, the Egyptian princess actually ends up using royal funds to pay Moses' own biological mother wages to raise him. You literally cannot make this stuff up.
Moving on to Section 2, Unpacking the name Moses. Now, one of the most fascinating debates in this entire story surrounds the very origin of the name Moses itself. Is it a Hebrew name or is it an Egyptian one?
The biblical text gives us a Hebrew explanation. Exodus says the princess named him Moshe, explicitly stating, "Because I drew him out of the water," from the Hebrew root mashah. But wait, a lot of scholars point to a distinct Egyptian connection here that makes perfect logical sense for an Egyptian princess.
So the Egyptian root word mis or mos literally means child. It was incredibly common back then to append it to a deity's name. Think of Ramses, meaning Ra is born, or Thutmose. Some scholars suggest that Pharaoh's daughter, who Jewish tradition often calls Bithia, simply named the baby child in Egyptian. Or, and here's the really mind-blowing part, if there was originally an Egyptian pagan deity attached to his name, the biblical writer might have just stripped it away entirely, leaving us simply with Moses, the child.
Section 3. History and Literary Motifs. Let's shift gears and look at the actual setting of the story to see how it builds upon ancient traditions. Because that whole basket in the river detail, it draws a ton of historical scrutiny. Skeptics love to compare the birth of Moses to the mythic Sargon birth legend. It's this ancient Near Eastern tale featuring a hero abandoned in a basket on a river. You'll often hear claims that the biblical author simply copy-pasted this exposed child motif. But when we actually look at the historical context, the details in Exodus point to a highly logical, historically grounded survival strategy.
The logic of the basket is absolutely profound. The Hebrews lived in the Egyptian Delta region, which was basically a giant wet marsh. To hide a baby there, papyrus and bulrushes were literally the only materials at hand, and as the text specifically notes, using slime and pitch was just the standard everyday way to waterproof something. This wasn't some whimsical fairy tale element, it was a desperately reasonable faith-based gamble by a mother utilizing her actual physical geography to save her son.
Section 4. The Moral Dilemma of Murder. Fast-forwarding a bit to Moses' adulthood, we immediately crash into a massive moral crisis. The boy from the river grows up, steps out among his people, and makes a genuinely shocking choice.
When Moses sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, the text gives us this incredibly chilling detail. He looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man around, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. I mean, wow. This forces us to ask a really tough question. Was killing the Egyptian justified? How on earth do we deal with a prophet who commits what looks exactly like premeditated vigilante justice?
Well, historical and biblical commentators are kind of all over the place on this. Some argue the Egyptian was actively committing a capital crime, making Moses' act one of saving a life, and therefore completely justified. Others suggest it was an unintentional manslaughter that absolutely required his exile. The text itself shows the Hebrews' own harsh judgment. The very next day, a man sassily asks Moses, "Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killedst the Egyptian?" It's a deeply complex moral moment that totally strips away any sanitized Sunday school version of the prophet we might have.
Section 5. Flight to the Wilderness. So the secret is out. Pharaoh discovers the killing, and Moses has to flee for his life.
He arrives in the stark, sweeping wilderness of Midian. Now, modern archaeology suggests this is likely located at the site of Korea in northwest Saudi Arabia. It is in this harsh, unforgiving desert landscape that Moses, as the text says, sat down by a well, officially beginning his profound transformation from a highly privileged Egyptian prince to a humble desert shepherd.
And notice how his first major interaction in Midian follows the classic encounter at a well literary motif perfectly. He arrives, sees the priest's 7 daughters drawing water, and when rogue shepherds drive them away, Moses stands right up, protects them, and waters their flock. This perfectly mirrors the biblical stories of Isaac's servant finding Rebekah and Jacob finding Rachel. It's a massive signal to the reader that a major covenantal shift is happening right here.
Now here is a linguistic detail that I absolutely love, because it solves a long-standing puzzle. The text calls Moses' father-in-law Reuel in chapter 2, but then abruptly calls him Jethro in chapter 3. Skeptics jump on this and call it a glaring error, but consider the Hebrew root word hoten. While our English Bibles translate it as father-in-law, scholars note it actually just means a general relation by marriage. This linguistic nuance brilliantly solves the mystery. Reuel was the actual father. But by chapter 3, Reuel has likely passed away, and Jethro, Moses' brother-in-law, has simply inherited the title of family patriarch. Same family, same hoten, just a different specific relationship. Problem solved.
Section 6. A typology of saviors. As we step back and look at the grand architecture of this text, we can clearly see that Moses' life wasn't just a simple biography. It was viewed by early scholars as a profound theological blueprint.
Take a look at the striking typological parallels between Moses and Jesus of Nazareth. The symmetry is incredible. Moses goes from a prince of Egypt to a desert pauper. Jesus goes from God to man. Both possess a secret identity in their youth. Moses saves women at a well in Midian, Jesus saves a Samaritan woman at a well. Both endure a grueling 40-day fast, and both deliver a new, foundational law from a mountain. The narrative intentionally connects the historical redemption from Egyptian slavery to much broader, universal themes of spiritual salvation. And that brings us to this incredibly powerful concept summarizing the literary genius of Exodus. The entire narrative arc is this beautiful full circle. Having been midwifed through the death waters of the Nile to new life by a coalition of brave women, Moses himself eventually becomes the ultimate midwife. He takes on the monumental role of drawing his people out of the waters of the Red Sea, overseeing the painful but ultimately joyous birth of a brand new nation. Section 7. Conclusion. So, what starts out sounding like a simple childhood story reveals itself to be an absolute masterclass in history, profound moral questioning, and deep theology.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. How does understanding the historical reality of the Delta, the clever linguistic clues of names and titles, and the brilliant literary design fundamentally change the way you view the baby in the basket? Because remember, it's this very child who God will ultimately use to answer the groaning of the Israelites in bondage. I hope this explainer leaves you wanting to dig even deeper. Keep asking those big questions, and thanks for exploring this with us.